So, welcome to the Crypto Hippie Drum Circle. My name is Kurt, and we've got here Chris,
Hello.
Katie,
Hello.
Anastasia,
Hi, everyone.
and the wonderful Jaliqua.
Hi, everybody.
So, we're going to talk about the secret and the law of attraction, the power of positive thinking. And the question is basically, how can your thoughts affect reality, or in what ways do your thoughts affect reality? So, yeah, it's a good question to start on. What I'd like to ask each of you, how much you think your thoughts actually do affect reality. Chris, what do you think?
All right. I think absolutely that my thoughts affect reality. I know that I know for certain that my thoughts affect my reality.
Yeah.
And I think that more than most people think, your perceptions, how you perceive reality, shapes your reality. So, it might be like, we don't know how much effect that has, but it could be up to 99% or 100% or something like that. So, I think that the way that you look at reality is extremely important in how things are going.
Yeah. What do you think?
I basically agree with Chris on this. I'm not sold on the idea that my thoughts affect physical reality outside of myself, outside of just that the way that you're thinking and the mindset that you're portraying affects the way that people treat you. I do think, though, that the way that you're thinking shapes your whole reality and frames what you see. So when people say that if you think positively, positive things will come to you, and if you're constantly thinking about the negative things will come to you, I don't know if it's that there's more things actually coming at you, or if it's just you're tuning your mind to perceive the positive. And when you think about the way that you want to go and you envision yourself following that path, the path and the ways to get there become clear.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna +1 that.
Anastasia, what do you think?
You better go, because I'm about to.
Well, I actually do think that thoughts create our reality, and I think it really all comes down to vibration. So if all matter vibrates at some frequency, then our thoughts, since they are technically matter, data, information, also vibrate at certain levels. So the more of that vibration that you're bringing into your life, whether it's negative or positive, the more that vibration tunes into the rest of reality. And I think that's where the law of attraction comes in, is that it's just on the same vibrational frequency that these different motifs are playing out. In my personal life, manifesting through thoughts has definitely been very clear. Like this weekend, there was just, and I mean, I think human beings are in general, recognize patterns.
What the fuck, people? Get out of it. If you're not feeling, get out.
We got some
Drama going on.
There's like some low vibrational frequencies.
Yeah.
Yeah, those might be some.
All right, we'll come back to Caleb. What do you think?
I have to say that we're all in agreement to some degree that, yeah, absolutely, that thoughts do affect our reality, and our thoughts are based on our perception, and that we are living in a vibrational world. However, I agree with Anastasia, I would have called it magnetism, but it is vibration at the end of the day. I feel as though our physical reality comes to us based on the vibration that we put out, just like that's basically in agreement with what Anastasia was saying. And we have the ability to do that, but I don't necessarily agree that our manifestations are rooted from our thoughts necessarily.
Oh, so do you mean let's see, sometimes things can originate within your mind, but sometimes things can originate somewhere else and your mind picks them up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I do agree with that, but what I mean is our reality is our perception, right? However, the reality that you and I share is a reality that we both want to experience. However, what we manifest into our lives can, if it's an active manifestation, I don't think it derives from the mind. My experience has been that it touches base on what she was saying, is that the vibration that we put out, and the source of the vibration that we put out would be from the heart, which is the actual, I don't want to say the only way, but it's the most powerful source of our manifestation route. I don't know, I'm not using the right words. My brain is running around in different languages right now.
Can you just ask what you mean by manifestation?
Well, reality is one thing. Manifestation would be, for me, what we want to create, what we want to experience within that reality. So the reality that we want to experience is one thing, but what we want to manifest within the reality is, I guess you could call it like the details to it. The details of
like what we want to appear in front of us or to become real for us.
Exactly, where you want to be. Anything you want to manifest it. Yeah?
Is this idea of manifestation basically the same thing as the secret that that we're kind of talking about, or like where you picture something, in all of its fine details, and that helps you actually achieve it?
Well, I feel like that's more still the mind. That's still the mind. Visualization has been a huge help and a huge tool for me, but it's more the feeling that derives within it. It like starts with a feeling within us, and from there, that feeling is expanded outwards through that vibration, and then is pulled back in because of the experience that we want to have.
Yeah, I was gonna add to that. I don't necessarily think it's not just feeling; it's also intent. Intent is very, very deliberate. So you're specifically thinking of something, trying to bring it into your awareness and trying to bring it into your physical reality. But you're putting that intent out there. That's all of the magical practices out there, ancient and modern ones, all kind of hedge on that intent thing. What are you actually trying to accomplish? Do you believe that you're going to be able to accomplish it? And then those two together, the intent and the confidence that it will work, is usually what brings it about in the physical.
I fully agree.
Like faith.
I was going to use your situation as an example, because we had a conversation before you were deported from Guadalajara, or from Mexico. Our conversation was about you wanting to go and visit family back in Australia. And one of the things that I was saying is, don't go into the mind of how you'll get there, or how you'll do it, how it'll come about. But if that intention, as Anastasia was saying, if that intention is there and that feeling is there, it will come about, even if it seems like it's a negative way of happening or not. It's the experience that you want to have, and you manifest it into your reality.
Wait, we had a conversation about me visiting my family before I got deported.
We were at the hot springs in the balcony, and you told me that you wanted to see your nephews and nieces, or I don't know if you have nephews and nieces.
Yeah, just nephews. Yeah.
Yeah, you wanted to see siblings and get closer to them, but you said you didn't want to have to go through the process of having to find a ticket, leave because you've been there for 3 years already. So you're like, I don't see how it's possible. And I remember saying, don't think about the how. So when it happened, a part of me thought it was kind of ironic. I was like, he wanted this. He wanted this.
Yeah. Be careful what you wish for, or,
Exactly.
maybe not be careful, but maybe, that's the whole weird thing about it, because at the time it seemed like a bad thing. Of course, many things, when they're happening to you, they seem bad, but in retrospect, it makes perfect sense. Every part of it was just as it had to be.
How far do you think this idea goes? I mean, what do you think about like young children who get terminal illnesses and things like that? How do you think that their thoughts are not affecting their reality? Because if we're going to put forward the hypothesis that like you create your reality with your thoughts and your intentions, then if we're saying that that's how things work, we would kind of have to say that people
that they're creating it themselves,
or who are murdered, even if their babies are doing that to themselves.
Well, my theory, if I may answer that, I don't know who you were directing that question to, but
anybody.
My theory is that, well, since we already know we're all one, we're not just single beings. We're we are cells within an entire body, right? So if we look at every single cell, then we get caught up in one cell's experience, as opposed to the fact that we are in this co-creation together. So Kurt going through what he went through wasn't just to his benefit or what he manifested for himself, but it was something that could actually be of benefit and use for other people, and it had an experience where it brought, for example, like this is silly, but it brought you and I together. Now I have a friend she had 400 tumors in her lungs, with 4 children, and she rescues dogs. She's this wonderful person. You'd never expect that she would have created her own reality of having diseases, for example. But now she has taken that experience and she is helping other people heal. So it's not that, like, it's not a matter of blame and saying, well, you did this to yourself. It's more that this soul experience that we have coming to this earth or coming to this 3D dimension is to be able to have different experiences that are beyond just the single cell, that affect the whole body.
Right. Yeah, I have a different way of answering that question too. So the thing about the question is, like, some people present that as an argument. They say, well, it can't be like that because that means that a child wished to have cancer, which is, for one thing, that's an argument by consequences. That's a logical fallacy. So this is not a very good argument. The other thing is, it's about, if we're like, we say this is a real idea, the thing would be some things you're conscious of, and the more you're conscious of, you have control over, or at least influence. But if you have unconscious things that you haven't addressed, then those things are going to surface, and that's a psychological fact. They're going to come out in one way or another.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like getting cancer, I don't know, but that's, if you don't handle your stuff, things can come out.
So are you saying that maybe the reason why the person is getting sick is because they're not, they don't have an intention of getting better, or they don't even maybe know that they have the ability to manifest a better reality? And so
could be. Yeah, could be.
So they're sick because they're,
because they're allowing things to drift into chaos instead of bringing them into consciousness and light. So it's not like they exactly wanted to be sick. That would be, no, it's like they didn't actually have a firm intention. I don't know if that's true, but it's one way to answer that question.
I wasn't trying to use that as an argument to say, like,
no, I know
this has this horrible consequence, so therefore it can't be true. I was just trying to test the models and see how people's models of
it's a reasonable question, but some people do use that as an argument.
Yeah, my model would be that that I think all diseases kind of manifest in the spiritual and the emotional. Like we know that stress affects our bodies physically, but I think it's a lot of other things. Like there's definitely, like, I've read about or heard about theories that maybe people who get throat cancer are not speaking their truth, and so everything is out of alignment in their emotional and energetic space and the kind of spiritual life. And so eventually it manifests into the physical, and it becomes this thing that somehow comes out, maybe through their throat, through their vocal cords, through their lungs, etc. And then if they do, go through the process, and I mean, there's a lot of strength that comes through going through such a tumultuous, like, challenge in your life, getting cancer and going through that and the struggle of it, and getting past it, and the triumph of overcoming and curing yourself. A lot of them actually end up finding their voice and go out there and become motivational speakers and survivors and help and support other people too. So I definitely heard that put forth.
I have noticed that there can be a correlation between sort of physical
and metaphysical.
Yeah, and like Anastasia was talking about, maybe if you're not, maybe your throat might start getting sick, if you're not using a particular emotion properly, or if you're not, you're not, what did you say, speaking your truth or something like that.
Yeah, or if you're carrying a lot of fear about something, like, things could start coming up in those, and that was kind of like correlated.
Yeah, so what I was gonna say is it. I think the cause and effect is kind of both ways. I think it's kind of a cycle, because once you start, once you get like a little bit of damage to an area, or maybe some just sort of rot from not using something enough, then that can start the process of, you feel less comfortable using it, and you feel less comfortable using it, and then eventually you can become very, very sick. it's kind of it maybe kind of a cycle or a virtuous cycle if you're healing, or a vicious cycle if you're getting sicker.
If you look at everything coming, like everything in life being cycles and patterns, like you're saying, it could also like, I think the problem with humans is that we try and find one answer to something, but this discussion, this drum circle, the reason I'm appreciating it is that it adds so many different answers and so many perspectives to just one single question, right? So it becomes multifaceted. But going back to what you were saying, since life is about cycles, we are our ancestors. This energy keeps on flowing. So sometimes it's not the child manifesting its own illness. It's the same organism recycling its energy into its offspring, right? It's creating, just like any other organism, once it reaches a certain level of no longer thriving, but coming into survival, and survival is under living, right? Sur is under, vivir is to live. So when you're coming into survival, you end up giving off the seed so the organism keeps on surviving. And if those things, like Anastasia was saying, aren't addressed, specific energies, what is specific spiritual or any kind of emotional, mental blockages that are created within one life form can also be passed on onto the child as the offspring, because it's the same energy recreating itself in order to survive and then essentially thrive.
So just to make a point about the words that you said, in Spanish, I know that survive is sobrevivir, and sobre means over. That's over.
Well, I'm talking like the Latin term, sur, would be under.
Interesting. In Spanish, it's sobrevivir, which is over. So maybe Spanish just has it backwards.
Yeah, that distinction between like the individual and the ancestral, like it makes me think of this whole conversation kind of made me think of like the Freudian to the Jungian, because like a lot of what you're talking about, like pains in the body and illnesses being manifestations of like spiritual or psychological problems, that's like the Freudian perspective, right? It's like Freud, when he in his practice, he found like all these women had like pains in their bodies, and then he was able to address them by like addressing psychological issues. And then if you extend that to like the Jungian insight, then it's like you could look at it like on a, you know, intergenerational or even societal level. Like if a society is like sick in a certain way, then you could have like certain kinds of illnesses becoming prevalent.
Sorry, what were you saying, Gil?
I was just saying she doesn't look anything like Juan. I was just a little confused.
Ariel, yeah. We actually went around and introduced ourselves. So Ariel is just doing
sorry for the lateness, guys. I'm Ariel. I'm only Juan on Zoom.
Do you have a general feeling about the idea of manifestation or the secret, or how you feel that thoughts may or may not affect reality within or outside of you?
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot.
Or how do your thoughts?
I guess like my perspective on this has been very influenced by Robert Anton Wilson, who encourages a mindset of being able to like look at it from both ways. Because like when you're approaching something like manifestation, you could, you know, there's a way of looking at it of like, you know, if I go out into the world looking for an opportunity, then I'm going to notice the opportunities more. Versus like if I go out in the world looking for an opportunity, then the universe will bend so that the opportunities come towards me. And so there's two ways of looking. Like either it comes from the success of the manifestation mindset, either comes from inside or it comes from without. And Robert Anton Wilson encourages like being able to hold both hypotheses within your mind and like switch between them.
It's the micro and macro, right?
That's brilliant.
Yeah,
I love that.
I like that a lot too.
I do remember, I think it's in Prometheus Rising, he said that exercise, like go out and look around for $50 and see if you find one. And I never did.
I did that. Yeah. I did that for like 6 months. And the trick is every time you find one, you're supposed to switch hypotheses. So the first time you go out and you're like, I'm looking for quarters. And because I'm like primed to notice quarters, I'm going to find a quarter. And the second, and once you find one, you switch to like, I'm going out with the intention that I'm looking for quarters, and so the universe will present quarters to me. and you just keep switching every time you find a quarter, and eventually it teaches you to like switch hypotheses.
Wait, so did you do that?
Did you? I did it. Yeah, I did it. I found 3 quarters.
Nice.
Profitable exercise.
Yeah. What is that like a thousandth of a dollar per hour?
I'm curious more about your model, Gil. It was really interesting to me when you were talking about the idea that we're kind of all one, so you can get caught up in looking at the individual branch and how they may be manifesting things to themselves when really it's You
The
see it as
whole.
more of like a one consciousness, and like individuals have a part in that, but we can lose it if we don't look at the whole picture. And I was curious also if you think of that just in humans, or if you see kind of the whole universe that way.
I see all of life, I guess, that way. It's the micro and the macro. So we're not aware of what the microorganisms, for example, using the word micro, are doing within the earth, but they're a part of a greater reality, right? But they're experiencing their own. So if I can give an example, I don't know if I'm actually giving the right example, but I had a friend who had a bunch of lizards, and he was very religious. And I was trying to explain to him that it's just a matter of perspective, and that the God that he thinks is external is actually internal. And he was, as we're discussing this, he was lifting the aquarium, the lid, and he was putting all these crickets into the lizard, this lizard box or whatever you want to call it. And when I told them, just like in this moment, from their perspective, you are their God. You have opened up the skies, and food, live food, has fallen from the skies for them. So I think it's the micro and the macro perspectives that we forget, because we get so caught up as humans and egos as just the micro, and we forget that we are part of a larger perspective, or a larger, I don't know what word to use without being trigger words. But
A larger
Yeah.
flow, a larger
organism.
larger organism, exactly. Well said. So it's, I think it has to do with that, and then realizing that we're not just these tiny little beings having these tiny little experiences. And once we do that, we step outside of these physical bodies and see things differently. Because I think when we want to see these things, we want to understand these things, we go back into the micro, the ego wanting to understand it, wanting it proven almost to them. So the quarter thing I've never experienced, or I've never heard of before. But what I used to do is with our kids is I would walk with one of, like with the, I'm a preschool teacher. I should give some background. And walking with the kids, they saw this poodle. One of them didn't get the pet, and I was telling them that you can see that same poodle if you want to just be able to, like, not just visualize, but have that experience before you have that experience, and it's a form of time travel even. So when we step out of the micro and go into the macro, we realize that time doesn't affect us either. So she started doing that, the girl. She started doing that, and she started visualizing this little poodle, and even though it was going in the opposite direction, within a block or two, it was right in front of us again. Now I have no way of explaining that. If I try and explain it, my ego kicks in, right? But the experience within itself, I tell people, just is see the black poodle. So it's not as profitable as the quarters, I agree. But it is definitely something that any different practice, like you want to see green lights, play with the green lights when you get to the stop sign. And you realize that your manifestation skills aren't just like, I want this. And it's very similar to what Anastasia was saying, is that there's an intention behind it. So it's more, what is the experience for, as opposed to just, I want this because I want this proven to me, or I want this because I want money. I want this. It's you know what I'm trying to say? It's like wanting defines
like there's
lack.
a whole foundation behind it.
Well, so yeah, exactly, to some degree, because want always defines lack. If I want something, I'm already saying I'm lacking it. If I'm lacking something, then I'm saying that I'm separate from everything. And if I'm separate from everything, I'm going to be living in the micro at all times, as opposed to the macro and micro.
I like how that ties perfectly into what Ariel was saying about the two different perspectives. About how you can either kind of have this bottom up perspective, which I guess you would call the micro perspective, and the top down perspective, which is the macro perspective. And we can quite easily, as humans, switch between those two perspectives. And we can find ourselves kind of absorbed in the micro when we're suffering, when we feel like we're lacking. But I feel like we get relief from that when we zoom out and we look at ourselves as a part of a large, intricate multi-organism, or collective organism.
Yeah, it's like the human body being the earth. If you want to just look at the earth, for example, or the universe, and then the cells being each tiny little person.
And being able to hold both of those perspectives simultaneously.
And flip between them and use both.
It's kind of the yin yang, right? Like the yang, like everything's individuated, and the yin, everything is connected.
Really? That's how that works out. The female is yin, right? And the yang is male, right?
Well,
feminine and masculine.
Everyone has both, and everyone and everything, right? But I think the idea is that like the yang represents like the masculine principle, where like it's all about like seeing the world as like a set of objects and cutting the world up into objects, and embodying your ego as like a separate individual thing and then navigating those objects to some kind of purpose. And the yin is more like seeing everything as a unified whole and just like experiencing being part of the whole, letting go of your ego, seeing the way everything's connected.
You said Freudian versus Jungian, right?
It's another dichotomy, yeah.
Okay, which one is Freudian and which one is Jungian? I forget.
I wouldn't really, I think that's a separate thing. I don't know to say one is one more than the other. I think Jung probably,
Jung is probably more.
Jung would talk about the yin and the yang, I think, or like the feminine. Jung incorporates that dichotomy in his work.
Oh, I gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
I think Freud is probably pretty yang.
What I really wanted to ask is the perspective of okay, I'm affecting my perceptions, and so I'm going to see more quarters. That would be more of a yang perspective, and then I'm going to bend the universe, or the universe is going to bend to my intention. That would be more of a yin perspective.
Yeah, like micro macro is like another way, kind of to talk about it.
Right. One thing I like to think about is the language that people use and how it affects their life. So sometimes I'll meet people and I'll tell them about some project or whatever, and they'll say, I would never do that. Or they say, I could never do that, which is even worse, And you know that most likely they're right. because they will never even try. And so it's like your speech is your karma, or your questions are your karma. If you ask, how can I do this? You have a very different result.
Words are spells, right?
One of my friends gave me like this really, really good exercise that I've started doing, and it's actually really helpful. Instead of when something goes right, what she does is she goes, thank you, universe, for gifting me this beautiful car, or thank you, universe, for getting me this great job. But then when something like bad happens in your life, like you lose your job, or, like you get into a fight with somebody, she instead goes, thank you, universe, for giving me this opportunity to better my communication so I can have better relationships with people. And thank you, universe, for giving me this opportunity to reevaluate my life and create a better decision.
I like that perspective that gratitude is important. I think that is a really important point.
I think if we're talking about thoughts and visualizations and intentions shaping our reality and shaping our perspectives, language is a huge part of that. Every word that we use, it's not just the denotation or the meaning, it's also the connotation. Different words, even that are synonyms, have such different emotion and intention behind them, shades of meaning, and it so shapes the way that we see and perceive things, and also what we're putting out into the world.
Yeah, the word is magic, right? That's why we cast spells when we write things down and we practice.
Yeah, I like what Jaliqua said, that words are spells, and I guess me too. Actually, like weirdly, this ties into what Jordan Peterson talks about, how the central motif of Christianity is that the logos, the word, speaking the truth is what creates reality, and speaking an honest truth creates a good reality.
Because it aligns you with objective reality.
Yeah, well, words are important. I think if we're going to bring up Jordan Peterson with that too, it's interesting how like people get very into policing language and the words that we use to describe different kinds of people, and political correctness and things like that. And then there's another perspective that says like people are getting too hung up on words. We shouldn't care about this, but we're kind of validating that words are important and do exist. Maybe just they're creating a different kind of reality that certain people don't want to engage in.
You're absolutely right. I think the whole policing thing has to do with controlling and being more neurotic as opposed to being more conscious, right? Because it's the way we speak to dogs. It's also what you said, it's the tone, it's the intention, it's the energy that we put into it. So when we turn around and like when we look at a dog and we say, oh, you're such a good boy, we can say, oh, you're such a douchebag. And it's going to pick up on our energy as opposed to the actual word. However, the more conscious we are, the more we realize that the words that we're using are creating our reality or are creating our perception, which is also tied into the reality. So I think I had a point that I completely forgot. But Kurt, do you want to pick up what you wanted to say?
Yeah, it was related to that. So it's like, it's very important to be conscious of your own language, but you don't have to try to micromanage other people's language. So that's the distinction that that was coming out of that, I think.
Can you macromanage?
Macromanage your own language.
But it's interesting with Jordan Peterson, because there's rule 8, which is tell the truth or at least don't lie, and there's rule 10, which is be precise in your speech. So it's like he kind of offers a perspective that's pro free speech, or like that basically treats language as very important, but also places it at an article of faith that like the free flow of language is optimal.
On psychedelics, psychedelic experiences that I've had a very intense experience of how I perceive reality becoming reality.
Yeah.
Psychedelics definitely magnify this this effect for me. And one of the things that I remember was one day I just had this realization. I was, maybe on some mushrooms or something, and I remember thinking, oh my God, other people can't hear my thoughts. I took for granted up until this moment that like stuff that I was thinking was somehow like other people could see it. And then I remember just like speaking and saying something and vocalizing something that I was thinking, and everybody thought it was really absurd. And I was like, whoa, like you guys weren't already thinking this? And they're like, no, what are you talking about? None of us would ever think that. You have crazy ideas. And I was like, interesting. And I was, from that moment forward, I was like, oh, I have to like say things in order for people to realize that I'm thinking them. And people are not necessarily thinking the same thing that I'm thinking. And I don't know if that's just, a quirk of my personality, or if other people kind of, I think I do see this in other people where they see something from a certain perspective and they just assume that that's the objective perspective. And so everybody is also seeing the situation from that perspective. And the words are what kind of reveal the differences in everybody's subjective realities.
Wait, so in your whole life up to that point, you thought that people could like somehow perceive your thoughts?
I don't know. I know that while I was on psychedelics, that's what I thought. So it's possible that, yeah, maybe like subconsciously I had this like, oh yeah, everybody is just seeing things from my perspective thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I think we all do at least in words that people understand those words the same way that we do. But then we all know from, debating others online and in person that actually it turns out that what people think is one word has one definition, but being a completely different definition for somebody else. And you're like, wait, I thought we were talking about the same thing.
Yeah. One of the most beneficial things in my life in personal relationships and also in online debates when I get into them is when I start talking to a person, if we're using some kind of terminology that has a lot of emotional heft to it or connotations, I try to figure out what language they're speaking and then speak theirs when we're debating something. And that seems to make things go a lot more smoothly. I mean, it would be great if everybody would define their terms and then come to some kind of consensus to do, but that doesn't happen very often outside of like. Yeah,
and when you try to drill down and get people to define their terms, normally it gets derailed.
And the limitation of that process is that you can only define words in terms of other words. So if you're trying to use words to find definitions, you're gonna, if there might just be some sort of fundamental differences between different people's realities that are not going to be overcome by just saying words. They have to be connected by shared experiences.
I think at some point words point to something that are outside of words, though. Like they have to, otherwise you're like you're forced into postmodernism. Like that's the Derrida perspective.
Words are symbols. That's the way I think of them. Words are symbols. Like we have the word apple. We're all thinking of the red fruit that's kind of crispy when you eat it. And an apple is a very concrete thing that most people have a shared experience of. So it's really easy to define that concept and have the assumption that most people understand what you're saying when you mean apple or when you say apple. But if you're talking about something more
ephemeral,
wobbly,
like
or ephemeral or abstract, like I don't know,
love.
yeah, like love.
Love.
Even in my own life, there's like 20 different emotions, if not more. I mean, there's an infinite range of emotions that I might use the word love to describe that are all really different.
Yeah.
And then other people are having their own experience too.
The way I think of it, it's kind of like a hand trying to like hold on to water. Like it's always going to slip through a bit, but there's still water there that's being held.
Yes.
Because if we don't say that there's like, you know, the way you experience love and the way I experience love and the way Chris experiences love and even the way a dog experiences love, like there's some commonality outside of like the fact that we're just using the same word, or that we can add in other words. If it's not pointing to something real, then like we end up in philosophical trouble.
I think that analogy is really good.
Well, and I want to add that using language, this process that we're all engaging in right now, is kind of it's an act of faith that we're all sort of on some kind of similar page with what all of the definitions of these words are. You know, you have to just kind of believe that other people, when you say a word, that other people are going to have something close to what you're experiencing.
It's also a creative process, if we want to bring it back to manifestation a little bit. As you're using language, the way that people tend to learn language as kids is you watch how other people and observe how other people use the words, and then that creates your concept of that word in your mind. And the more that we talk about a particular word and the more that we engage in conversation, our concepts maybe narrow and get more precise or become more broad. They just become a lot more fleshed out. And words change over time too. The meaning of words is fluid and mean different things in different areas. And there's things like slang and shift of meaning over time. We're creating the words by using them.
Definitely. Having been intensely learning a foreign language for the last year has given me a new perspective on the meanings of words.
Yeah.
Spanish is totally different from English.
Yeah.
Even when something is a direct literal translation, you can't always use it exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
I like how Spanish is so literal. Like when you say, in English, we might say someone's incarcerated, but we don't really know what that means. If you say it in Spanish, you know, it's the encarcelado, you know, that means they're in a cage. There's no way you have to know what that is.
Oh, is cage like
Cárcel. Cárcel. Yeah.
Spanish
So
is
sometimes they say in una cárcel, but in
Actually,
English, if you say someone's in a cage, that's like that's like a slang thing that anarchists say. It's not something that regular people say. They're not so literal,
right?
Or precise.
I do like how a lot of new Spanish words that I'm learning are actually just sort of like stretched out versions of words that I already know, or shrunken versions of words.
I was going to go back to what Katie was saying. I guess like what you were saying about like words, like over time they become like used in certain ways, and that almost creates like imprints.
Mm-hmm.
Like it makes me think of Rupert Sheldrake and like morphogenic fields. You guys know that concept?
No.
Yes.
It's the idea that like all of reality kind of works that way. That like when something happens, it creates almost like a
habit.
Like an impression in reality where like that thing, it's easier for that thing to happen again, like almost like a mold's been created, and it just like applies to like everything pretty much. Like he did it where like they would teach like rats this like they would condition rats to do something for some experiment, and he found that afterwards all other rats learned that thing more quickly.
100 monkeys theory, right?
Oh, it's not about the tipping point though. It's about the repetition of this process being slowly ingrained. So it's related to the 100 monkey idea. Yeah.
What's the 100 monkey idea?
I think that makes a lot of sense. If we just think about a reality coming from a very basic reality and then evolving into something like we have now, like coming out of the Big Bang or whatever your idea is, systems that self-propagate will propagate more. So you can think about it in terms of evolution, like the cells that are successful at surviving will survive. Like whatever is good at laying down the path for itself to continue will flourish and continue more. It's just kind of a law of how things work, not just in life, but in every area.
Have you guys heard of the Lindy effect?
No, what's that?
So this reminds me of that. This is something that Nassim Taleb talks about in The Black Swan and Anti-Fragile, one or both, I can't remember. And basically, it's exactly what you guys just described. It's the longer something has been around, the higher the probability that it will continue being around. So but it's sort of mathematical, and you can.
Okay, your question before, what's the 100 monkey effect? It's where there'll be monkeys on an island and they'll all learn something, for example, washing root vegetables in a river. And at first it'll just be the children that learn it. And then eventually they gets to a certain point, which supposedly it's around 100 monkeys, where everybody starts doing it. And the adults will start doing it on that island, but also monkeys on nearby islands will start doing it.
It's actually said that it happens like around the world. So even
Without
if
communication?
without communication. So it's happening, again, the micro-macro, right? So it can be happening in China, let's say, and then all of a sudden it's spread all around the world where all monkeys are doing the exact same thing without them having that verbal communication or visual sight.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Like it is the macro, micro, or the yin yang thing again. Because like Chris, like what you guys are kind of like what Chris and Katie were kind of talking about was more like the yang perspective of like there's like an evolutionary system why things propagate, and it's like we can break it into steps and see the cause and effect, and it all makes sense. Versus like the Sheldrake 100 monkeys thing is more like things are just connected in mysterious ways. And like, if I have an idea and it's like an idea that no one's ever had before, then it makes it more likely that someone else somewhere in the world that I've never met is going to have the same idea just because now the idea exists.
Do you think that the idea, having the idea in the universe makes it more likely that the ideas will exist? Or is it like the conditions are ripe for you to have that idea and also might be ripe for others to have that idea, and it's all just kind of connected?
I think those things go together.
Those are the two hypotheses, right?
I think they're compatible. I think they go together.
Have you guys heard of the Global Consciousness Project?
No, what's that?
So this is
it's just about random number generators?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so what they've done is they've made these little pseudo-random number generators. You know, they just generate random numbers all the time. And they've been doing this since 1998. Let me just read it. So the Global Consciousness Project is a parapsychology experiment begun in 1998 as an attempt to detect possible interactions of global consciousness with physical systems. The project monitors a geographically distributed network of hardware random number generators in a bid to identify anomalous outputs that correlate with widespread emotional responses to sets of world events or periods of focused attention by large numbers of people. And so basically they just collect random data from all of these random number generators from around the world. And what they found is that the random numbers actually become less random during specific significant events for humanity. Like apparently on September 11th, 2001, there was a big spike in like correlation between all of these random number generators. So so this discussion reminds me of that, and it also reminds me of like quantum tunneling, where like or quantum entanglement, I guess is what it's called, where you have two particles which are entangled and they like instantly communicate with each other across vast spaces.
How are a lot of random number generators actually work by tuning into like white noise?
Yeah,
like,
I'd have to
radio noise or radiation in there.
But
computers can't create random numbers by themselves. So any like computer program that creates random number is really a pseudo-random number unless they're taking input from the real world, so like white noise or like the movement of you moving your mouse. We're
assuming that the analog data like white noise and radiation data or all these things are random, but maybe that's saying that it's not kind of evidence of this mysterious connection that we're talking about.
The other weird thing that they found in the Global Consciousness Project, I'm pretty sure, is that they noticed that the correlation between the numbers is actually increasing over time. So the general amount of randomness is actually going down over time, which is crazy when you think about like, well, the law of entropy, which says that randomness should go up over time.
Yeah, I mean, that supports like the Sheldrake thing, right?
The Sheldrake thing?
The Sheldrake, like the hypothesis, like morphogenic fields, that like when things happen,
right,
it makes things more likely to continue happening.
So Gela, when I interviewed you, you told some very interesting stories about when you got your Swedish citizenship and the problem with insurance and everything like that. Do you want to share that story?
Sure. It was just essentially it was me being, I had all the odds against me from being able to actually travel. So I didn't have a passport at the time. I didn't have a citizenship. I was indebted. I had Lyme disease. I was just curing myself from Lyme disease. There were a few things, and then the insurance money hadn't kicked in. It was a lot backing up, and eventually I just sat down, and I was indebted with a specific company that hadn't contacted me for 8 years and didn't let me know that I owed them any money. And then it all just piled up once I kept on feeling like life was happening to me, being the micro, only the micro. And I felt like everything was happening to me. And then eventually I got fed up. I hadn't traveled for 13 years. I hadn't left Sweden for 13 years. And I wrote myself, I was telling Kurt, I don't know if I got this from the Law of Attraction or The Secret or whatever it's called, that movie's called, or the book, but I wrote myself a letter from the company that I owed money to, and then I wrote down a specific number as well from the insurance company that I needed, and then I mailed this to myself, and once I came home and I read it, I ended up getting within a week's time, it was actually 5 bank days, less than 5 bank days, I ended up getting my passport, my citizenship, which is supposed to take 3 months in between to be able to get both in your hand. I got my passport, my citizenship, the debt was cleared, exact word for word. I still have this paper in Sweden and the letter. Word for word, what I had written to myself, I got back from the company, the sum that I wanted from the insurance company, exact numbers. It was kind of like, it was a little mind-blowing, and it was the time that I realized that we are magic. It's not that magic exists, it's that we're literally experiencing it by being alive, and then the micro and the macro kicked in. Is that the part you meant?
Yeah, that was wonderful.
Amazing story.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
Very similar to what most people experience. I think once we release the control of I am doing this or I want this, and the single micro becomes a part of the macro. I don't know, I just really enjoy the words micro, macro.
I like this morphogenic fields idea and this micro macro dichotomy idea. I think they're both useful like ways of being to tune into. I had a really interesting experience once. It was under the influence of psychedelics, so I don't know. That may or may not have influenced it. But I feel like in that moment, I was really in tune with the macro. I was at a music festival, or a general festival. It was called Envision, but there were a few different music stages. And I had been hanging out painting near one stage, and I was leaving that area to go get some food and water. And I remember I walked out of the area of influence of that one musical stage. And as I did that, I noticed how people's moods and conversations and just overall vibes were correlating with the music that was happening there. And then as I got far enough away, I started to feel like other vibes and energies coming in from the other music stages. And I could kind of walk around and like predict what the music was going to be like based on the energy or feeling that I got from the people coming from those areas. So I was playing with that a lot. And then I started thinking a lot about how we are like living in this field of events and different centers of activity, and how those different vibes and energies all mix together and like co-create. I don't know. It was a great experience of that macro feeling.
Can I add something to that?
Mm-hmm.
I've always had this theory that, well, everything that exists organically, we try and recreate synthetically. And the 100th monkey, or the theory that Ariel was talking about, I don't remember what it was called, Trish, I don't remember what it was called, but if the internet didn't exist, and our telepathy would have kicked in stronger. If the internet wasn't the external version of the internal, what we were already connected through. So what you're saying is you were, if I understood it correctly, like you were stepping into, I lost the way I was going to explain that.
I was stepping in and out of different centers of activity, and I could feel how the music, which was kind of the overwhelming force in those different centers, was influencing things. And I could see how as you got further away from one source of music and got to like the central area where the sources of music were mingling and mixing, it was just a feeling and a perception of how those different centers were affecting what was happening in the middle, and then how what happened in the middle would bring things back out.
I think this brings up an important point, which is that music can be a lot more powerful than words.
Vibration, right? They're all vibration at the end of the day.
And it allows everyone to have a shared experience. Maybe they're not having exactly the same emotional experience, but they're certainly, on the same wavelength, as it were.
I think what's great about music and art and film, art in general, is words are tools to describe an experience, but I think that music and art are tools to convey an experience. Like, I can talk about sadness, but if I'm doing it in a normal tone, usually that's not going to make the person feel what I was feeling when I was describing the experience. But if I played a sad song, it kind of brings people into that space.
I don't know. I mean, isn't creative writing also kind of?
Well, creative writing is also like a form of art. So it's not just words versus not words, but there's different ways of using it. Like descriptive versus creative writing, poetry, more immersive experiences.
It's like a deeper, more powerful use of language or other things.
I kind of question this more powerful thing in a way, because I personally think that like the yang principle and the yin principle, like, or the micro and the macro, like, I don't prioritize between them. I think they're both equally.
Just different words describing the same thing, essentially.
Or they're the two polarities, right? But it's like
equally powerful, but just different.
Well, to me, words are less universal than music. In order for me to enjoy creative writing, the person writing the piece needs to be somewhat similar to me. Whereas with music, I can kind of pick up what they're laying down, even if we haven't had very many shared experiences.
I don't agree with that. I mean, I think like when it comes back to like the Jungian thing, it's the idea that there's a human nature and it's specific, and there's like certain things that like all human beings can relate to in some way, or there's certain universals or universal patterns. I mean, like the Bible. Like the Bible was a book that was written by like one people at one time at a very specific time and place, and it's influenced billions of people for like thousands of years.
That music is more universal than language. Is that there's a lot of songs that people will sing passionately, not knowing anything of what the words are saying.
Exactly.
Like I had a friend that would sing every word. He would try to sing every word to songs of Linkin Park, and completely butcher the English. It was hilarious. He didn't understand anything, but he loved the songs. And that's it.
I don't know if I would say it's more powerful, but I would say that it's a different kind of power. I think that music is better at conveying emotion usually. I mean, words can do that, but I think that music is just like the perfect tool for trying to bring a person into a shared emotional experience with you.
The way I would put it is the difference between music and creative writing is the same as the difference between like pop music and like a really niche music that only I like and me and like a small group of people like. Like the connection is more intense, and the experience of shared experience is a lot stronger when the group of people who understand the concepts or understand the experiences is small.
Yeah, I would say I don't agree with that either. I mean, you can tell a very good writer if a very large audience resonates with the way that writer describes things. So yeah, if you're a terrible writer, probably usually maybe some people will get what you're saying. But if you're really good at using descriptive words to kind of paint the picture of what you're, trying to explain to people, then just about everybody should be able to relate to that.
How about this? Yeah. This is just an idea I'm throwing out. We've talked about the idea a lot that everything is vibration. Music is specifically tuning into that and using vibration as the primary tool, whereas words they're sometimes about vibration, about rhythm, but it's more about a symbol for a meaning that you take in and interpret, whereas music is just putting the vibration out there in a more direct way. Some people, you can use words also rhythmically and poetically to induce that kind of vibration and feeling, but music is maybe more natural for that kind of thing.
like I don't believe that music is more universal than words. I would say that like I think music is probably more immediately and viscerally emotive than words are, or has the power to be, like to tap into the emotions more directly. I think what's interesting about words is and literature in particular is it has like the power to kind of connect the like symbol making, meaning making, and like cognitive side of things with the emotive vibrational side of things. So in some ways I kind of see words as like a bridge.
I think if you guys have ever been in a drum circle, whenever, and you all better have been in a drum circle.
We're in one now.
With words, whenever the music starts like getting a little tribal, right? So or right, like it's sort of heavy bass, repetitive sort of drumming. There is a tribal thing that I feel in that, and I've sort of noticed like people get really excited about that. There is no language in that. And now, which one is deeper than the other?
Or it's a type of language. It's a deeper type of communication.
It's certainly a type of language. Yeah, I mean, it's a form of communication without a doubt. I would say it's less precise, you know, but it still communicates something, and it communicates across languages. I mean, I would bet you that doesn't matter. Like you could have people from different parts of the world, and they would react the same way to that music.
So I wanted to add to that. I want to bring it back to what we were discussing about the same thing repeating itself. Once it repeats itself, it's actually going to unify more people and it's going to become less random, right? So what if that tribal thing that you're talking about, Juanito, is actually like it's becoming less and less random, and it's actually unifying more and more, as opposed to words that we go back to that perception that kicks in. Does that make sense? Am I explaining myself right?
Kind of. Yeah. I mean, words can be used like that, like chants.
Yeah.
Kind of effect. But then it becomes less about the words themselves and more about that strong.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a confound with words is that with words, like there's different languages. So obviously, you know, someone who only speaks French isn't going to understand this podcast. But the thing about words is like the words aren't actually about the words themselves. They're about it's like on one level they are, but on another level they're about the ideas that the words convey. Mm-hmm. And that's why translation is possible. And you get things where there's like a book written in one language and it's translated into like 50 languages, and in all 50 languages people are like obsessed with the book.
Maybe it's wrong to say that it's more powerful, but it's different. I like what Juan said. It's less precise, and maybe it's more based and more animal. Like most animals don't have language like words, but they still definitely communicate through feelings and sounds and dances or different ways of doing things that are maybe more like music for us.
Yeah, I mean the question of what's more important is a tricky question, because it depends on what your goal is. Yeah. So it literally depends on what you're aiming for, and everybody's aiming at more or less different things, sort of.
So Juan, what do you think about how our thoughts affect reality? We've already asked that of everybody else, so your turn.
It depends how much weed you smoke.
That is an important factor. I have noticed that as well.
I mean, I'm a real like I'm sort of like I don't know what to call it. Like I don't really believe in things that can't exist. But that's exactly. So I'm open to the idea that things that I don't know about that exist.
Yeah.
However, until further proven, I refuse to believe in them, but they may exist. So I think like if you think about something, thinking about it might have an effect in your brain, and then you might start acting things unconsciously in such a way that they impact the real world. And that is a way in which things manifest. To me, it's not like you're defining your own universe, right? Like Sasha Dagan had a moment, I don't know if he still believes that, but he believed that like literally you are the maker of your own adventure 100%. Like there's no externalities, no forces outside of yourself. You're not competing with other people. You will your reality, and you're just living in the version that you want to live in a quantum way, kind of like, you know,
the universe obeys your intention.
Well, it's like the universe forks at every decision you make, and a different version of you continues on at every step. And it's like, whatever, man. Like,
Part of what Geller was talking about was his two different perspectives of things, and how I guess reality is like a negotiation. So you do have to work things out with other people, but it doesn't mean that what's in you isn't powerful and has an effect, and can affect reality.
Yeah, that I definitely agree with, and the amount of control that we have over our environment is incredibly powerful. Like incredibly, like even the worst case scenarios that we've seen, like gulags and people being like under the most extreme forms of torture we've come up with. People's internal like how they, like their ethics, or their metaphysics really had a lot to do with whether they survived or not, right? Like there's like stories of Christians that were just totally stoic and at peace, even though they were like starving, right? And then there's like all the commies that are like pissed off and miserable and like hating each other, right? And Dostoevsky, I think, was it that talked about that, or no? Who was it that?
Solzhenitsyn, and then Viktor Frankl wrote a similar book about similar themes about the Holocaust.
Yeah, so you definitely have a lot of power, but we're not gods. We're mortals, and we're to some degree limited.
Well, so we have God essence within us.
We got God essence for sure. Yeah, but
did you guys fill in one about the micro and the macro perspective?
Yeah, I get it. So like, yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. There's definitely two sides. Like you can think of the Germans stereotypically as people that are very, very good at like mechanical micro sort of, step-by-step stuff. And then like as a stereotype, for example, right? And then there's also like another mindset, which is like sort of very spiritual, very timeless concepts, big picture. It's not about sort of the timely restraints, right? The mortal restraints, right? I do believe it. Like there's sort of it's really funny. There's a game called the Dragon Age Origins. And in that game, you kind of go into the Fade. The Fade is the spirit of the realm of the gods and the spirits. And these are like timeless entities that they're just there. They're in your mind, and they're kind of like emotions and memories. And anyway,
one of the things that I hoped we would get to while Gela was still here was kind of the nuts and bolts of manifestation. Like how do I know I'm doing it right, for one? And for two, is it stronger if lots of people are all doing it once?
I think one of the keys, one of the secrets that I've found, and I mean, I don't know what all the secrets are and whatever, but like language, like if you speak it, that's like a big deal. And if you speak it to other people, that starts to like solidify it. But you can also like lie about it or hide it, and that weakens it, right? So it's like both neural networks and then social networks, and then actually building infrastructure and then habits, and then like quitting smoking. Like that was like a fucking, like I went really hardcore, and so far so good. I'm 20 days deep.
I bet it helps to tell people that you're quitting, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's another way of looking at the same thing. I've heard this described to me, like when you have a thought that's a one-dimensional object, one-dimensional occurrence, and then you write it down on a piece of paper, and that's a two-dimensional occurrence, and then you start actually taking action as a three-dimensional occurrence, and it can, if you complete the process, it keeps building.
How many dimensions are there?
That's
1,072. Scientific fact. Source: Richard Feynman.
It's interesting because I think there's like a lot of truth to that, but I also think there's some truth to the inverse. Like I once heard this like Anishinaabe elder say that secrets are like the sacred. They're both weakened by being shared. And it's the idea, and I think there's almost something to that too. Like it's almost like if you have like, pardon?
What did you say? They're both weakened by being
shared? They're
both
weakened by being spoken. Weakened by being spoken. So
Okay.
It's like the idea that like if you like go into the desert and have a mystical experience, then if you go around being like, oh, let me tell you about my mystical experience in the desert, this and this happened, then it somehow the energy of it spirals downwards a bit.
So
right.
when you speak about something, you're
Definitely feels
kind
that
of
way.
creating a new memory of it that's maybe further away from the initial memory. Because every time you speak about something, you're converting that memory into the symbol of language, and you're kind of playing a game of telephone with yourself. And My understanding of the brain and memory is that a lot of times when you're remembering things, you're not remembering the original event. You're kind of remembering the event. So if you speak about something a lot and basically just keep doing a lot of iterations of telephone, you might get further away from that.
Which is really good for dealing with trauma.
Yeah.
And really bad with dealing with like very special positive memories, I guess.
I would wonder if like ritual and maybe more artistic, like musical type things and meditating on that memory might help strengthen it if you diluted it from by speaking. Like speaking might get you away from the emotional feeling of the memory, but you might be able to recreate that.
Yeah, I believe that emotions are like compacted. They're compacted data. They're high, like they're compressed information. So it's just a lot of data, and it just gets bundled up into like a move in that direction. It's an embodied momentum, and it's like a decision that's been made ahead of time, and then you can actually unpack them by like thinking about them. And then in there's like memories, a lot of memories of events, right? And then there's like arguments, right? There's like if this then that, and a bunch of like various complex arguments, and then there's like a metaphysical side of it, right? So like there's so for example with the, well, anyway, I can totally change the topic by giving you that example, so never mind. But there's like metaphysical sort of.
Let me talk about that, what you're saying about emotions as information, because I've actually had the experience during meditation. I might have some discomfort, like frustration or something, or some kind of sadness or regret. And it's a very visceral feeling, like I can feel it in my belly. And during meditation, I'll focus on it. And it's almost like it opens up, like a flower opening up, or like a crystal expanding, and it turns into something beautiful. It's a very interesting experience.
Does it always turn into something beautiful?
It doesn't, I guess it doesn't always, but.
And probably the more you practice this process, the better you get at bringing that to fruition.
That was the thing as well. You said transforming it, or, you might say transmuting, but actually I think it's a different process. I think it's more like Juan described. It's actually more like unpacking it. It's like a zip file. Chris, your question about the nuts and bolts, I think Geller's method, she told that story about writing the letter. So obviously writing the letter is a kind of visualization task, and it's also engaging her physically. And she's also, as she's doing it, this is what she says is really the important part. She feels the emotions. So she would put that letter on her hat stand or whatever, come home the next day, and she picks up the letter. It's her letter, but, forget that for a moment. And she opens it up as if it's a real letter. And she's like, oh my God.
What does the letter say?
The letter says that she's receiving a lump sum from her insurance company, and the other letter says that she's now a Swedish citizen, and the other letter says that her debts have now been forgiven because they can't prove all at once, right? And she's, as she said, they're like within a 2-week period.
And then they actually came.
Yes. And she said, and she told me in the interview that it was very similar wording. So pretty amazing.
She actually still has the letters too. I'm not sure if she has both what she wrote and what she received, but
right.
It would be really cool to. My Yang brain is like.
Yeah. I'm super skeptical.
No, but here's a way to explain that in a way that's like actually like fine. So our brain, this is another thing that I believe in. There's apparently good science.
It's fine either way, Juan. That's the first thing.
That conforms to my model of reality.
Here's how it doesn't break my worldview.
Go ahead.
So there's this like scientific experiment. There's a bunch of experiments like this where, let's say, I think one of them that was famous was you get a bunch of university students and you get them to hear like a 15-second audio clip of a professor, but then they model, like they blur and model the audio clip a ton. So like, you only get like tonality. And then none of these students know who the professor is, and then they rate them with a sort of like a university rating test of professors.
they've transformed his voice so it's not.
You can't hear. You can't hear the. It's only tonality. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just like a blurry tonality.
Okay.
Like
And
the
they compare
teacher from
the
Charlie
ratings. Huh?
Brown. Like the teacher from Charlie Brown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or Woodstock.
And so they compare the
Okay.
rating of they compare the rating of the students that have never met the teacher with the rating of the students that were with the teacher for like 6 months to a year or whatever, and it's like within like a very small margin of error, which is like a big deal. So they're very accurate, like they're very close in accuracy, and so like that's a big deal as far as psychology goes. And one of the theories as to why is that the unconscious brain is this machine that has like incredible amount of processing power, but it's all unconscious, right? And so people are just feeling it out, right? It's sort of this compressed. It's more than a zip file. It's like programs that are like complex programs that are running, and you're just feeling it out and acting it out. And the conscious mind is like it's like a laser, right? Like you can at any point look at any of those programs and look at it with a zoom and look at it in very detail, but you can't look at the whole. It's overwhelming. It's just too much information.
It makes perfect sense because there's the conscious mind. I think how most of us tend to think is in language or in visualization or in something like that. But there's a lot of creatures and animals out there that don't have language. There would be no way for them to have a narrator in their head. So there's probably a lot of stuff, like most of our ancestral history doesn't have any of the things that we typically think about as far as
Our consciousness isn't limited to language, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
we're conscious of emotion, and like mammals seem to experience similar emotions to us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, certainly.
do you guys know what a Fourier transform is?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Go
kind
ahead
of
before you go down the rabbit hole. Yeah, so the way that Ted explains it is maybe I'm sure she's dealt with bureaucrats before. I'm sure she's dealt with her insurance company before and received insurance letters before. I'm sure she's dealt with immigration before. So she already has the language of how this thing might play out. And to some degree, part of her might be just betting on it happening, right? And maybe the odds are that it's going to be positive, and maybe luck was in her favor, and she was just able to recreate the letters ahead of time with enough accuracy because she understands how these organizations speak.
The impressive thing about the story, well, one of the impressive things is that it happened at all, that she received these letters at all, that she got a positive result.
Right.
So it's not just that she predicted more or less how it happened, but that, that somehow she caused it to happen or, gave the universe a little push or whatever.
Or maybe it was just like, it just helped her deal with the stress and she got lucky.
I don't understand why the micro and the macro perspective can't be true at the same time. I mean, clearly they're both happening. Clearly there's a way that your perceptions shape your reality, and there's a way that your subjective reality shapes your actions. And so, and there's a way that your actions shape your objective reality, the external world. And so all of these things are connected. So, as Juan was saying, maybe just the having the ability to visualize something that clearly is a sign that that you already understand enough about the universe to make something happen.
So it's completely clear that your perceptions affect the way that you take in reality, and your perceptions affect your actions, and your actions react to external reality. What's not clear, or at least what's not clear to me, but it seems to be totally clear to lots of people, is whether basically there's communication channels on the perceptual level that like skip over some of those steps or go different routes, where your perceptions and your ideations and your emotions can communicate back with the hub and like put things out in other parts of the world that aren't directly related to.
I remember I used this example with you, Katie, where I talk about I was sitting in my study and I started wobbling my leg, and there's a lamp on the desk at the top of the desk, and if I wobble my leg in a particular way, all of a sudden the lamp starts wobbling like this. And so it's not like we're not connected. We're all connected. in some way. But how exactly are we connected?
And not only are we connected, but we're probably connected in ways that we can never understand, and because we evolved together as social beings. And so when one person has a very intense experience of some particular emotion, or maybe like an intention that they're trying to manifest, other people are going to be affected by that, maybe just by seeing that person, maybe just like seeing an expression on their face, just being able to look at somebody's face or look them in the eye is a very intense communication that's happening. Like there are mirror neurons and things.
There's a lot of history there when you look in somebody's eyes.
So I totally agree that we're all connected, and all the different sort of possibilities you mentioned. But one of the possibilities is that we're connected in ways that are actually very shallow. So like I am probably connected with some person in China that I don't know, just because there's a trillion sort of dots of air between me and them. And if I blow in this direction in 20 years, it might have an impact on them, but who gives a fuck?
It's not intentional, and it's very chaotic as well.
But even if it's just, even if we are just like, it is purely the, whatever you want to call it, the micro is the only level that truly exists. Like we're still more connected than it immediately appears, right? Like there's the 5 degrees of separation thing. The idea that you're only like 5 or 6 degrees separated from every single other person in the world.
Yeah, I think they say it's down to 4 now with Facebook and LinkedIn.
Damn.
I don't know if those count as real relationships, though.
No. It's not. But it's still like, the idea is like if you say something, then if it's a good enough thing, everyone can hear it.
Movements spread fast, like focuses spread fast, memes like just ripple.
Yeah.
Yes.
And our world is not that big. Like a ripple can happen in a couple of days or in a couple of hours.
But a ripple is a really great example. So this actually brings back to what Chris said earlier that I wanted to address, which is like, if you are aligned from the macro to the micro, then why isn't that just the destiny or determinism in a sense? Like, if that's how I understood it, is like, if you're acting in a way that's aligned at every layer, right, from the macro to like let's say that there's the following layers, right? So there's the spiritual timeless concepts and sort of like the timeless forces, and then there's the societal, and then there's the familial, and then there's the individual layer, and then there's the micro sort of like health layer or whatever, and then there's the technicality of whatever you're doing, something like that, right? Let's sort of just brainstorm some layers, right? If you're aligned with all of them, your force, your momentum is crazy powerful. But there's other people in the same universe, and those people in the same universe might have different alignments, and they might have a different alignment, the 2 middle layers and the proper one at top, or they might be aligned with the macro layers but aligned with you in the micro. And so like at some point you got to ask the question of where's the clash of wills, and how does the clash of willful manifestation happen? And then we end up in sort of psychology again, basically.
Yeah, no, I think that's like a super interesting question. And I think you do kind of see people getting like, twisted around other people's wills. Like it's like the Nietzsche thing. Like if someone's like really strong-willed, and they can kind of pull other people into their current a lot of the time. But I guess like one way to look at it in terms of that, like where everyone could have like this manifestation power individually is like kind of what you were saying before, Juan, about like the multiple realities interpretation of manifestation. Like the idea that like when you like put your mind on a certain path, like you're not actually like creating that reality, you're just like moving towards it.
Between like the free will and determinism question that touches on it. The problem with that, like this is the quantum reality sort of idea, I guess. And the problem is there's no way to prove that other realities exist. So it doesn't matter, right? Like it becomes a sort of, and failure exists, right? If everybody's reality manifested, then everybody would be achieving everything, the best that they wanted for themselves. All the time. People are selfish, right?
No, that's an oversimplification, because people believe that they can get to a certain level. They have a certain idea of themselves, and that affects what they want. So it's not just a case of, if everybody got what they want. People don't always know what they want.
Right, exactly.
Also, maybe want isn't the right term, because when we're talking about manifestation with this idea, we're not just talking about saying, I want a car. It's talking about focusing your attention and intention and feelings towards that car, which is very different from like having a fleeting want.
So what I was going to say earlier, and I don't think this completely changes the subject, but I think it's important to point out, and it's part of the nuts and bolts discussion too, is that the more, like, I think pretty much everybody who holds this belief about The Secret agrees that the more that you believe it's going to work, the higher the probability it is that will actually work. So if you're like a religious zealot, you know, then you might actually be a really powerful person because you have this like unshakable belief. You know, you might end up failing or something like that, but I would say such a person has a much higher probability of succeeding than somebody who just kind of a little bit thinks that it might work.
Yeah, well, that's similar to what Ariel said about Nietzsche and people getting pulled into their force of will.
It goes both ways too. Like if you have a really strong, unshakable belief, then even if things hit you, if reality's hitting you in a way that might make other people question that belief and stop going down the path that they're going towards or go towards a different goal, a person with that strong of a will is going to keep going even through those obstacles.
Yes.
Other people say like, oh, like this isn't working out. It's better to devote my energy elsewhere. I do have an interesting idea. Well, I don't know how interesting it is, but I have an idea. Maybe it's not necessarily that what we believe is going to happen, but nothing can happen to us if we don't believe that it can happen. Like from our perspective, even if we're talking about something very concrete and in your face, like getting hit by a bus, if you never believed that you got hit by a bus, then you subjectively never had that experience.
When you experience a phenomenon which is outside of your subjective reality's ability to explain, you have two choices. You can either change your subjective reality and update it so that the new phenomenon makes sense, or you can disregard the and act like whatever you experienced didn't really happen.
It's interesting because like that kind of shows like with the two perspectives, like they each have their like virtues and their defaults. Mm-hmm. Like if you're going to be like incredibly strong-willed and just like believe in like whatever thing you're believing in and just like move towards it and not let anything come in your way, then in a certain extent you are sacrificing like some rationality and creativity to be that person. Whereas like if you're always in the like perspective of like always trying to figure things out and always being open-minded and always open to whatever comes and always open to multiple interpretations, then you're giving up. You're not going to be able to embody that like strong-willed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Here's something I think about. So I used to do door-to-door sales, and we'd go and knock on about 80 doors in a day and speak to like 60 customers. And the thing is, if you really want to be a good salesman, when you knock on a door, you have to believe that you're going to make a sale. Now, rationally, I guess factually, you know that it's not probable. In fact, it's highly improbable that you're going to make a sale on that exact door. But if you want to be good, then you have to do it. You have to believe.
Also, a very effective sales tactic is to just pretend that they've already sold.
A person goes their entire life believing in miracles. They only have to see a miracle once to make that belief valid. And that's the power of belief. If they didn't believe, they'd probably never see it.
Exactly.
I'm a realist, and as far as like there's things that we don't believe that are going to happen, that may happen, and we might hit a wall. Like if you don't believe that there's a wall and you run straight for it, you're going to hit the wall, and it's going to.
Oh yeah, I wasn't trying to say that things don't happen to you even if you don't believe that they will happen. But in that moment, if you don't believe that you're hitting the wall, if you're so strong-willed that you don't believe in walls, then your subjective experience never hit the wall. You interpreted it a completely different way and from your perspective.
There's a great quote. I think it was from Michael Jordan. I'm not 100% on that, but basically he says, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that sums up.
I think it was Wayne Gretzky.
I think like with the like macro hypothesis, which is the one we're not sure about, like you got to interpret it in such a way that like maybe you can have like some influence, but the influence isn't absolute.
Mm-hmm. Well, it wouldn't make sense for any individual's influence to be absolute if you're taking a macro perspective, unless you don't believe that there are other individuals.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting question here that Jordan Peterson turned me on to, which is like we don't actually know what the limits of an individual's potential are. We know what the minimum amount of effort they can do, which is 0, right? You can just be a vegetable, but we don't know how impactful one person can be, and it might just be like if because like there's compounded interest type effects in, let's say, getting really good at something, right? The better you get at something, the faster you'll get better at something. It's like an exponential curve. It's a hockey stick. And so if you play your cards right your whole life, and you add some luck to it, and you add some good starting point, maybe, right, or whatever, or you just add some crazy willpower and courage and whatever, right? Like just stack all the cards, like the internal and external cards. We don't know what one person can achieve, right?
Yeah.
And then if you add technology to it, now we get trippy, right? So there might not. We don't know if there's an end to the human potential, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think a good example of that, or something that I like to think about in terms of that, is world records, like for athletics. They don't tend to hold for ridiculously long periods of time. And if we thought about a model where there's like a limited amount of human potential, or we're anywhere close to the limit of human potential, and somebody beats a world record, you would think that it would take a long time before another extremely exceptional human would come along to beat it. But what I think is that when somebody hits a particular record, it motivates people, and it also empowers the people around them to believe that it's possible to run a marathon that fast.
Yep.
And then they believe in it, so they might give up less quickly than other people would, and also, technology is improving and things like that. But I don't think that we can put it all down to technology when it comes to things like sprinting.
I had a really interesting experience which relates to that, which is one time I was trying to solve a problem, and I took like 1 or 2 looks at the problem, and I was like, this looks. I was I had rented an RV with some friends, and we were trying to get like one of the keys to work in the lock. And there were like all these different locks, and there were all these different keys, and there were all these different combinations. And so I looked at it, and I was like, this looks hard. And I kind of gave up. And then my friend, Sarah, went and solved it. And she was like, I found which key and which lock, and it works. And I was like, oh, and then I went, she was like, see if you can figure it out. And then I went and I tried it, and it worked really fast. I just, and all it took was just knowing that there was a solution. Because originally I was just like, well, maybe he just didn't give us maybe the guy that we rented it from, just didn't give us the right keys, and there is no solution. But then once she found the solution, I was like, oh, well, there is a solution. So I knew that spending time to look for the solution was going to be worth it. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that in human society, where it's sort of monkey see, monkey do type thing. Like one monkey succeeds at something, and then all the other monkeys go, oh, and then they all.
So there's a lot of that, and then there's also the what was it called, the 100 monkeys effect, where as soon as that solution existed in the universe, then it almost as if the solution exists as like a separate entity or ephemeral thing, and once it exists, then it's here for other people to pluck it out.
Yeah, like one of the things that I think about when I hear about that 100 monkey effect is that one of the deeper layers, right? Like all the monkeys are on top of some fundamental layer, and like we can just think of it as like tectonic layers, or even like the ecosystem, right? So like something happens at a lower layer that shifts it for a vast majority of the monkeys, and then that makes it more likely that they will discover the thing. And so that's part of why we see this sort of emergent effect of like simultaneous manifestation of X, is because the fundamentals have changed such that, statistically speaking, if you roll the dice enough times, one of them will hit.
So this monkey effect is like confirmed. It's not like controversial whether it.
I don't know. Yeah, well, according to Sheldrake, what happened was there was an experiment going on, I think in Melbourne University, and it wasn't about it wasn't exactly about that thing. It was just about trying to get these rats through the maze. And then they tried the next generation of rats, descended from that first generation, and they said, okay, well, is this, are they going to get better at it? And they did. And they were like, what? Wait, well, how can that be? The information can't be passed through the genes. So somebody...
Well,
right,
No, and then they did it again.
Exactly. They did it on the opposite side of the world with the same maze. And the rats got through it quick enough.
Yeah.
And then they were like, all right, well, I guess it wasn't genetic. Never mind. Stick that under the rug, because we don't need to think about that anymore.
Wow.
That's
okay,
how
we need to
Sheldrake
link the shit in the description. That's interesting.
So another thing I think about is like this kind of bubble effect, and there's a lot of layers to it. So there's a lot of them just within your own mind. So like you have these cognitive biases. So if you believe something, obviously we all know how this works. You filter out the stuff that you don't want to see, and you ignore the arguments that you don't want to think about, and this kind of thing. And then there's also on a social level, so you go onto Facebook and you have friends who are part of your social circle, and they have similar beliefs, and they parrot these things back to you, and you support each other's beliefs. But then you also have people within your social circle who don't agree with you, but they know you have a very strong opinion. So they're like, I'm not going to even bother arguing with Kurt about that. He's just he's just an ass. And then you go on Google and you try to find, you look something up about it, and you're not going to get the results that contradict your opinion, because Google is designed to give you what you want. So
the search terms that you would use would be the language of someone who believes in it.
Exactly. So it goes together. So even if you use DuckDuckGo, you still got a little bit of cognitive bubble there. So there's a whole bunch of things that happen. So people ask, how much do your thoughts determine your reality? Well, just on that level, on this micro level, a lot. They do a lot.
Well, it's somewhere from 0 to 100%.
Yeah, confirmation bias exists. I mean, that's for sure.
Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy.
There's the hypothesis that the only level that exists is the micro level, but that we're like, because of confirmation bias and all this, you interpret it as like the macro level where everything's connected.
Go ahead.
Even if the macro level doesn't exist, a strong belief that the macro level exists influences the power of the micro level. Right?
Yeah.
Because the more you believe that some reality exists, the more, some objective reality exists, the more your subjective reality is going to be tuned to that particular perspective.
As long as your beliefs are tuned to a perspective that would be beneficial in the reality, then it's good. But I mean, you might have your beliefs tuned to a perspective that will cause you to keep running into walls all the time and like not even believe that you're hitting walls. That wouldn't be good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like that's kind of the being only in the macro perspective all the time. I could see some dangers in that.
Oh, definitely.
I guess because it's like if you think that the best case scenario is always going to happen, then you're not planning for the worst case scenario.
Yeah. Notable also, there's some people that are always in the macro perspective and they think the world is just out to get them. There's a lot of people who live extremely dark realities where just everything is coming at them all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, or like the victim mentality.
I know people who are just like, oh, I'm such an unlucky person, and they just have this like deeply held belief that they're just really unlucky. And this thing that happened to them is just, so unlucky, and it would never happen to anybody else. And I'm just like, maybe you just don't understand reality that well.
And that gets into like the social justice thing too, because it's like living in like a victim mentality of like, oh, like there's so much sexism and everything sucks because like, everything's being unfair.
You start seeing the oppression everywhere.
And it's like, maybe it's like with the maybe there is some truth to it. Like there is some sexism or there is some racism. And it's like, it's good to be able to get into like the micro mentality of being able to like see when it does happen, but to always be in that, like, it's everywhere, like you can interpret everything in terms of that paradigm. And it's very disempowering.
So that's an area where the dichotomy I think is extremely important, because on the one hand, from an individual perspective, You're going to be much better off believing that you can overcome the obstacles that are in front of you and not focusing on whether a person is being sexist towards you or whether a person is being racist towards you. And just like, you don't want to get into the mindset that you can't achieve based on your race, sex, gender, whatever. However, like on a whole, if society just ignores the biases and the issues that are there, that's going to make it way harder for people. So you don't want to get into the victim mentality, but you also don't want to lose empathy and lose touch with the reality of things that are going on.
Yeah, and I think one of the keys there is that there's no one rule that you can follow to understand everything fundamentally, other than like to stay conscious, I suppose, and try to understand it genuinely and humbly, right? But like, you know, if because like the modern sort of kind of extreme left feminist types, right? They have this ideal of a world where there is no suffering at all, and that's what it should be. And then they see this particular lens of suffering everywhere, and they think that that's the, you know, people like they have this interpretation that it's just sort of, you know, the patriarchy or whatever, that everything that is in society is the cause of some male conspiracy or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how they experience it all, but that's because they have this lens of judging everything through perfection. And one of the things that is interesting is like, if you flip it, if you say no, like the vast majority of human existence is just misery, like life sucks and we're trying to make it better, then suddenly it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, life is tough and shit happens, and yeah, I mean, but that's compared to all the shitty stuff that's happened in the history of humanity and that could potentially happen, that's actually not that bad, and you maybe should chill the fuck out a little bit, right? And I'm not saying that this justifies any kind of wrongdoing, right? But like, it depends on the perspective that you look at it from. And then, yeah, and I mean, it's complicated, right?
In my perspective, the best strategy, in my experience, the best strategy is, you know, neither one nor the other, you know, neither, total yin, total yang, total micro, total macro. The correct strategy is sort of an oscillation between extremes.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're having problems in your life, you have, you have to move, you have to make a change, and you can either change to sort of double down on your beliefs and just go all out and become more extreme and see if that increases your pain or see if it reduces your pain. Or you can just swing the other way and, you know, try, if you've been really macro, then try the micro. If you've been really micro, then try the macro.
Oh, I'm liking what Ariel said in general about oscillating and testing out the different hypotheses and purposely holding them both and switching.
Yeah, and historically, as far as the macro goes, there's been conflicts among the gods historically for as far as you can look back. And what are the gods if not the macro, right? So like, but before we had like scientific, psychological, like sophisticated psychological sort of thought and research, and you know, like had developed the scientific method, and before Aristotle came up and like came up with like sort of logic and a bunch of stuff, right? We had the gods, right? And the gods were just sort of projections, like anthropomorphic projections of abstractions, right? Like they were just, we just thought that they were like living creatures moving around, and that were
like every emotion had like a personification, which was a god. You know, you had like the anger god and the creator of the world god and war god and the, you know.
Oh yeah, and they had like the Greeks had like various roles, right? And the gods, like if you look at the family, like the family history of the Greek gods, it starts with like two of them. I think it starts with one, and then there's two of them, and then there's three, and then those are like the Titans, and then the Titans have like, there's all this narrative and conflict between Titans, and then from there there's the children. There's a bunch of like, you know, and they multiply, but then from there they come like Zeus is like the god of gods, and then there's this whole sort of family history there. And that eventually kind of got washed away, right? And one of the things that replaced, well, the Greek gods and the Nordic gods, like the Viking gods, there's a lot of parallels between those. So there's probably like a background sort of family history of gods that unites them, like sort of like thinking like of a genetic animal, like an animal whose genetic branch sort of split into two.
Well, and of course, this is exactly what the topic of Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson, about kind of all of the different mythologies and how they all kind of were really similar to each other, and they all were projections of the human psyche.
Yeah, they have conflicts that are played in the social, right? And our memory of the gods kind of like is the settlement of that conflict. So which gods we pray to today, those are the gods that have been the most successful adaptively from an adaptive perspective to humans. And that's it.
Yeah, and I mean, you can apply that too to like what we're calling the micro perspective is basically the idea that like everything follows a chain of cause and effect. And, you know, if we think something and then it happens, it's because there was like a direct material chain of cause and effect. Like that's the Newtonian perspective. And it's a perspective that's like been very useful to us over the past like 400 years. But it's still, you know, you could look at it as like a god that we're worshiping and we're projecting onto reality.
And if you guys ever get around to reading the book, Gödel Escher Bach by Hofstadter, one of the central themes of that book is the conflict, the eternal conflict between holism and reductionism, what he calls them. So holism would be the macro perspective, and reductionism would be the micro perspective.
Yes, he also talks a lot about
holism and reductionism.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. I highly recommend that book to everyone.
Should we wrap up?
Yeah, I think.
Oh yeah, I guess it's almost 5.
All right.
Take it
Well,
away.
thanks everybody for sharing their perspective and being cool and being respectful and having a great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Kurt.
Thanks for watching, audience.
Yes, audience, thank you for tuning in.
Join a public group. We have a public crypto hippie group. The link below. Crypto hippie drum circle. Let's hang out. We're gonna have a mini conference in Acapulco, Mexico. So if you come down, keep an eye out. You'll be hearing more about it.